Tonight, we ask the question that breaks every rule. In the world we know, dragons belong to the Targaryens, silver-haired, violet-eyed, the blood of old Valyria, the dragon lords who conquered the Seven Kingdoms with fire and ruled them for 300 years. Dragons were Targaryen. Dragons were southern. Dragons were the opposite of everything the North stood for: ice, honor, wolves, the old gods, and the old ways. A dragon in Winterfell was impossible. A dragon hatching for a bastard named Snow was absurd. And yet, what if Ned Stark brought more than a baby home from the Tower of Joy? What if, wrapped in the bundle that contained his sister's dying wish, there was something else? Something small and cold and dead-looking. Something that Ned mistook for a stone or a keepsake, or a piece of Rhaegar's legacy that he kept because Lyanna asked him to keep everything. What if the stone sat in Winterfell for 16 years, cold, dormant, waiting? And then, on a night when the king of the Seven Kingdoms was sleeping down the hall, and the world was balanced on the edge of a war nobody saw coming, the stone cracked open in the hands of a boy named Jon Snow, and the fire that came out of it changed everything. Not just the war, not just the politics, everything. Because a dragon that hatches for a bastard is a dragon that proves the bastard is not what the world was told, and the proving is the thing that burns hotter than any fire. The egg. What Ned brought home. Ned found it in the tower. Not the baby. The baby was obvious. The baby was the mission. The baby was the thing Lyanna pressed into his arms with her bloody hands and her dying breath and the words that would govern his life. Promise me, Ned. The baby was the promise. The baby was Jon. The other thing was beside the bed, wrapped in silk, Targaryen silk, the kind that came from the free cities and that only the Dragon Kings could afford, the red and black fabric that was Rhaegar's colour and Rhaegar's taste. Ned unwrapped it because Lyanna had said, "Take everything. Promise me. Everything that's his." And Ned took everything because Ned kept promises. Inside, the silk was a stone. That was what Ned saw. A stone. Oval. The size of a man's fist, dark in colour, the surface patterned with fine scales that could have been natural geological formations or could have been something else. The stone was heavy, heavier than its size suggested, dense, the weight of something compressed. The stone was cold. In the Dornish heat, in the tower where Lyanna had been dying, and the air was thick with blood and roses, the stone was cold. Ned wrapped it back in the silk. He put it in his saddlebag with the baby's things, the small clothes, the blankets, the personal effects of a woman who had loved a prince and who had died for the loving. He rode north with the baby and the stone and the secret and the grief. The ride north was the longest of Ned's life. Not in distance, in weight. The horse carried a man, a baby, a secret, and a stone. And the weight of the secret was heavier than all three of the others combined. Ned rode through dawn with the baby against his chest and the stone in his saddlebag, and the knowledge that the lie he was building would have to last forever. Because forever was how long the truth would be dangerous. He thought about the stone sometimes. In the long hours of riding, when the baby was sleeping and the road was empty, and the Dornish heat was baking the grief into the leather of his saddle. The stone was unusual. The weight, the texture, the fine scaling on the surface that looked almost organic, almost alive. If Ned had been a maester or a trader, or a man who had spent time in the free cities, where dragon eggs were rumoured to exist as curiosities and collector's items, he might have recognised it. But Ned was a Stark. Ned knew wolves and ice and honour and the cold stone of the north. He did not know dragon eggs. He held it once, on the road, took it from the saddlebag and held it in his hands and felt nothing. The stone was cold. Dead. Whatever it was inert. And the inertness was reassuring because inert things were not dangerous. He was wrong. But the wrongness would take 16 years to reveal itself. At Winterfell, Ned put the stone with Lyanna's things. Not many things. The Targaryen silk, a small pendant that might have been Rhaegar's, the few personal effects that a dying woman in a tower had accumulated during the months of her confinement. Ned wrapped them in cloth and carried them to the crypts and placed them at the base of the statue he commissioned for his sister, the stone woman with the long face, the face that was Lyanna's face rendered in permanence, the face that would watch over her things for the years that followed. The stones sat beside the statue, in the dark, in the cold. The cold did not kill it. The cold preserved it. The stone sat in Winterfell for 16 years. Ned put it in the crypts. Not deliberately, not as a hiding place, but as a keeping place. The crypts were where the Starks kept the things that mattered, and the stone was Lyanna's. And Lyanna's things belonged with Lyanna's statue. And the belonging was the kind of decision that Ned made without thinking, because the thinking would have required examining the stone, and the examining would have required understanding what the stone was, and the understanding was the thing that Ned, honest, northern, wolf-blooded Ned, was not equipped to provide. The stone sat beside Lyanna's statue in the dark. It sat through 16 northern winters. It sat through the births of Robb and Sansa, and Arya, and Bran, and Rickon. It sat through the years of Jon's childhood, the years of the bastard at the Lord's table, the years of Catelyn's cold distance, the years of the boy, growing up not knowing who his mother was, or why his father kept the secret. The stone waited. Stones are patient. This one, more than most. Jon, the boy who went down. Jon went to the crypts because Jon always went to the crypts. The crypts were the one place in Winterfell that was entirely his. Not his room was the bastard's room. The small room, the room that Catelyn had allocated, with the precision of a woman who managed a household, and who had decided that the bastard's quarters should be functional, but not comfortable. Not the yard. The yard was shared. The training ground where Jon sparred with Robb, and where the competition between the brothers was always present, always watching. The invisible measurement of the legitimate son against the illegitimate one. The crypts were Jon's, because nobody else wanted them. The Stark children avoided the crypts. Sansa found them creepy. Arya found them boring. Bran was too young to go alone. Robb went occasionally, out of duty, the heir paying respects to the ancestors. But Jon went regularly, weekly, sometimes daily, to sit in the dark among the stone kings and queens of winter and feel the thing that the crypts provided. Belonging. Down here, the Starks were stone. The names were carved, and the faces were permanent, and the hierarchy that governed the living, Lord, Lady, Heir, Bastard, was irrelevant to the dead. Down here, Jon was as much a Stark as anyone. The crypts taught Jon things that the castle above could not. The crypts taught him patience. A boy who sat in the dark with stone kings learned to be still, learned to listen to silence, learned the discipline of being present in a place that demanded nothing. The castle demanded. The castle demanded performance, the constant calibration of the bastard's behavior, the daily management of being the wrong name in the right place. The crypts demanded nothing. The dead did not care about names. The crypts taught him history. Jon read the statues the way other boys read books, the faces of the old kings of winter, the iron swords across their laps, the direwolves at their feet, Brandon the builder, Theon Stark, the hungry wolf, Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt. The names were carved, and the stories were permanent, and Jon absorbed them the way the stone absorbed the cold. Slowly, deeply, permanently. The crypts taught him something else. Something he could not name. A feeling, a pull, a gravity. The sensation of being drawn to a place that was, for reasons Jon did not understand, more his than any room in the castle above. The bastard did not belong in the Lord's solar, or the heir's chamber, or the lady's drawing room. The bastard belonged in the dark, with the dead, in the place where belonging was not contingent on a name. He sat beside Lyanna's statue, his aunt, though he did not know it. He sat beside her because her statue drew him, the way all the crypts drew him, the way the darkness and the cold and the stone faces drew him, the pull that was not intellectual, but physical, the blood's recognition of the place where its history was kept. He had been sitting beside Lyanna's statue for years, since he was 12, since the age when the bastard's loneliness had intensified from a background hum to a daily wait, and the crypts had become the place where the weight could be set down. He never noticed the stone, It was small. It was dark. It sat beside the statue's base, half covered by the dust of 16 years, invisible in the dim torchlight that was the crypt's only illumination. A stone among stones, in a castle made of stone, in a country defined by stone. There was no reason to notice it, until the night it got warm. Jon was 16. He was in the crypt on the evening before the royal visit, the visit of King Robert Baratheon and the entire court, the visit that would bring the south to the north and the politics to Winterfell, and the cascade of events that would change the Seven Kingdoms. Jon was in the crypt because the arrival preparations had intensified Catelyn's management of the household to a level that made the bastard's presence in the main castle particularly unwelcome, and the crypts were the place where unwelcome did not exist. He was sitting beside Lyanna's statue when his hand brushed the stone. The warmth was immediate. Not gradual, immediate. The stone, which had been cold for 16 years, was warm. Not body warm, fire warm. The heat radiating from the stone's surface with an intensity that was impossible for an object sitting in a crypt at the northern edge of the world. Jon picked it up. The stone pulsed. Not visibly, internally. The pulse was felt rather than seen, a rhythmic throb that travelled through the stone's surface and into Jon's palms and into his arms and into his chest, the beat of something inside the stone that was not geological and not mechanical, but biological. A heartbeat. Something inside the stone had a heartbeat. Jon held the stone and felt the heartbeat, and did not understand what he was holding and did not drop it, because the not dropping was instinctive. The body's recognition, deeper than thought, that the thing in his hands was important in a way that transcended understanding. He took the stone to his room. He put it beside his bed, wrapped in a cloth, the heat radiating through the fabric and into the air. He slept beside it. The warmth filled the small room with a heat that was not Winterfell's heat, not the hot spring heat that warmed the castle's walls, but a different heat, a living heat, the heat of something that was waking up after a very long sleep. He dreamed that night. He dreamed of fire. Not the destructive fire of burned villages and war. A different fire. An internal fire. The heat of something living inside. Something that looked dead. The fire was amber and gold, and it pulsed with a rhythm that matched Jon's heartbeat. The synchronization of two lives that were not yet connected, but that were approaching connection with the inevitability of a river approaching the sea. In the dream, the stone cracked. Just a line, a hairline fracture, running from one end of the oval to the other, the surface splitting along a seam that had been invisible until the pressure from inside made it visible. The crack glowed. The glow was the color of the fire inside. Amber, gold, alive. Jon woke up. The dream was vivid, more vivid than normal dreams, more present. The kind of dream that left an impression on the waking mind like a footprint in snow. He looked at the stone beside his bed. The stone had a crack in it. A real crack. A hairline fracture running from one end to the other. Exactly as the dream had shown. The crack was not glowing, not yet. But the stone was warmer than it had been the night before. Warmer and pulsing. The heartbeat stronger. The rhythm faster. The thing inside getting closer to the thing outside. Jon touched the crack. The heat travelled through his finger and into his hand, and the touching was recognition. The mutual recognition of two things that belonged together and that were, through the stone's shell, touching for the first time. He wrapped the stone in a fresh cloth. The old cloth was singed at the edges. The heat had begun to burn through the fabric. He held the stone against his chest and felt the heartbeat against his own heartbeat, and the two beats synchronized. And the synchronizing was the beginning of the bond that would, in 2 days, change the world. The royal party arrived the next day. King Robert Baratheon rode through Winterfell's gates with the Lannisters and the Kingsguard and the 100 attendants that a royal progress required, and the castle erupted into the chaos of hosting. The preparations that Catelyn had been managing for weeks reaching their climax in the organized frenzy of feeding and housing and entertaining the most powerful people in the Seven Kingdoms. Jon stood at the edge. The bastard's position, present but not prominent, visible but not important. The boy who was Ned Stark's shame standing in the courtyard, while the king embraced the lord and the queen assessed the castle, and the golden prince looked at everything with the bored contempt of a boy who had been given everything and who valued nothing. The stone sat in Jon's room, getting warmer. The hatching. The night everything changed. The egg cracked on the third night of the royal visit. Jon was asleep when it happened. The stone, the egg, the dragon egg, the thing that had been masquerading as a stone for 16 years, was beside his bed, wrapped in cloth that was now scorched from the heat, the fabric brown and brittle from the temperature that the egg was producing. The crack was audible, a sharp, clean sound like ice breaking, like stone splitting, the sound of something impossibly strong giving way to something impossibly persistent. The sound woke Jon. He sat up in the dark, in the small room, in the bastard's quarters, and he looked at the egg. The egg was glowing. The scales on the surface, the patterns he had thought were geological, the fine ridges that covered the oval shape, were emitting light. Not fire, light. A warm, pulsing amber light that filled the small room with the glow of something being born. Another crack. The egg split along a seam that ran from top to bottom, the two halves separating with the slow pressure of something inside pushing outward. The thing inside the egg, deciding, after 16 years of dormancy and 1,000 years of genetic memory, that the time had come. The dragon emerged. It was small, the size of a cat, smaller than Jon had expected, though Jon had not expected anything because Jon had not known what a dragon egg looked like, and had never imagined that the warm stone beside his bed was the shell of a creature that had not existed in the world for over a century. The dragon was dark, not black, dark in the way that deep water was dark, the colour shifting between green and brown, and the nameless shade that existed between them. The scales were wet from the hatching, the newborn gleam of a creature fresh from its shell. The eyes were open from the first moment, gold and burning and fixed on Jon with the focused intensity of a thing that had been waiting 16 years to see the face it was looking at. The dragon chirped, not roared, chirped. The small sound of a newborn predator, the noise that was the beginning of the voice that would in time produce the roar that shook castles and the fire that melted armies. But now, in this moment, in the small room in the bastard's quarters, in a castle full of sleeping lords and kings and queens, a chirp. Jon held out his hand. The dragon climbed onto it. The claws, tiny, sharp, already strong, gripped Jon's fingers. The weight was negligible. The warmth was not. The creature radiated heat, the internal furnace already burning, the fire that was the dragon's birthright, producing the warmth that flowed through Jon's hand and into his arm and into his chest. Jon held the dragon, and the dragon looked at Jon, and the looking was the bond. Not the dramatic, magical, lightning bolt bond of legends, but the simple, animal bond of a creature, imprinting on the first warm face it saw. The dragon had hatched for Jon. The dragon had been waiting for Jon. The dragon was Jon's. The chirping got louder. This was the problem. The dragon chirped, and the chirping carried through the thin walls of the bastard's quarters, and into the corridor, and through the castle that was full of sleeping guests and servants, and guards who were not accustomed to the sound of a newborn dragon at 3 a.m. A guard came to the door, then a servant, then Robb, whose room was closest. Then the noise brought more people, the cascading investigation of a castle responding to a sound that nobody could identify, and that everyone wanted explained. Robb opened Jon's door. He looked at Jon. He looked at the thing in Jon's hands. His face did 3 things in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, disbelief. "Is that?" Robb said. "I don't know what it is." "It's a dragon." "It can't be a dragon." "It's a dragon, Jon. I can see, those are wings. Those are scales. That's a dragon." The dragon chirped at Robb. The chirp was territorial. "Mine," the sound said. "This person is mine. You are not mine." "Where did you?" Robb began. "It was a stone. I found it in the crypt. It was warm, and I brought it to my room, and it hatched. A stone in the crypt hatched into a dragon. I know how it sounds." It sounds impossible. It looks. Robb stared. It looks real. The dragon was real. The dragon was small and warm and chirping and sitting in Jon Snow's hands in a castle where the king of the Seven Kingdoms was sleeping 2 floors below, and the realness of it was about to change everything. The commotion brought more people. Servants. Guards. The noise escalated. Voices in the corridor. Footsteps. The sounds of a castle waking to something that defied explanation. Ned arrived. Ned came through the door in a nightshirt with ice in his hand, the Lord of Winterfell responding to the disturbance with the instinct of a man who protected his household first and asked questions second. He came through the door ready for a threat. He saw the dragon. Ned's face did not do the 3 things Robb's face had done. Ned's face did one thing. It went white. The colour drained from the Lord of Winterfell's face with a speed that was visible even in the dim light of Jon's room. The grey eyes went wide. The jaw set. The body that had been advancing, sword in hand, ready for the threat, the body stopped. Completely. Ned Stark froze in Jon's doorway, with a Valyrian steel greatsword in his hand, and the most honest face in the Seven Kingdoms, showing the most naked terror Jon had ever seen on any face. "Father," Jon said. Ned looked at the dragon. He looked at Jon. He looked at the dragon again. The looking was recognition, not of the species, not the logical identification of, that is a dragon. Something deeper, something that connected the dragon in Jon's hands to the stone in the silk in the tower in Dawn. The stone he had carried north 16 years ago, with a baby and a promise. "Close the door," Ned said. To Robb, the voice was the Lord's voice, the voice that commanded and was obeyed, and that did not explain. "Close the door, and don't let anyone in." Robb closed the door. The 3 Starks, the Lord, the heir, and the bastard stood in the small room with a newborn dragon and the beginning of the end of every secret Ned had ever kept. Ned, what the father knew. "How long?" Ned said. Not a question, a demand. The Lord's voice. "Since last night. I found a stone in the crypt, beside Aunt Lyanna's statue. It was warm. I brought it to my room. It hatched. It hatched." Ned leaned ice against the wall. He crossed the room. He looked at the dragon in Jon's hands. The small, dark creature. The wet scales. The gold eyes that were watching Ned with the instinct of a newborn that did not yet know what a threat was, but that was already categorizing the large man in the doorway. "The stone," Ned said. "From the tower." "What tower?" Ned stopped. The stopping was visible. The Lord's discipline, clamping down on the word that had been about to escape. The reflex of a man who had been keeping a secret for 16 years, and who was now in a small room with a dragon and 2 sons, closer to the secret's exposure than he had ever been. "Father," Robb said. "What tower?" "Not now." Ned's voice. Hard. The hardness that Robb had heard perhaps twice in his life. The hardness that said, "This is not a discussion. This is an order. Robb, this castle is full of the King's court. There are Lannisters sleeping in our guest chambers. There are King's guards in our corridor. If anyone sees this, if Robert sees this, Robert will see a dragon," Robb said. "Robert will see a Targaryen weapon. Robert has spent 17 years hunting every remnant of the Targaryen dynasty. A dragon in his best friend's castle, hatched for his best friend's bastard." Ned stopped again. The stopping was worse this time. The Lord's composure cracking under the weight of the implications. "Why?" Jon said. Ned looked at him. "Why did it hatch for me?" Jon held the dragon. The small creature, purring now, a low vibration that travelled through Jon's hands and into his chest. A dragon egg. Dragon eggs hatch for father. Dragon eggs hatch for Targaryens. That's what the histories say. Targaryen blood. Valyrian blood. Not Stark bastards. Ned's face. The thing on Ned's face was the thing that Jon had been looking for his entire life, without knowing he was looking for it. The answer. The reason. The explanation for all of it. The secret. The unnamed mother. The refusal to discuss. The 16 years of silence that had defined Jon's life. The answer was on Ned's face. And the answer was terror. And the terror was the proof that the answer existed. "There's something you haven't told me," Jon said. "Jon, about my mother, about who I am." "There's something." Jon held the dragon. The dragon chirped. The chirp was insistent, hungry, the sound of a newborn that wanted feeding. A dragon hatched for me. Me, not Robb, not Sansa, not any of your true-born children. Me, the bastard, the Snow. Why? "I can't." "You can. You've always been able to. You chose not to." Jon's voice, the voice that was changing, that had been the bastard's resigned acceptance for 16 years, and that was now, in the presence of a dragon and the proximity of a truth, becoming something harder. "Tell me why." "Not here." Ned's voice was barely controlled. "Not now. Not with Robert Baratheon sleeping 2 floors below us. I will tell you. I swear on the old gods, Jon. I will tell you. But not tonight. Tonight we hide this. We hide it, or we die. Die. Robert kills Targaryens, Jon. Robert has killed every Targaryen he has found for 17 years. If Robert sees a dragon in this castle, if Robert connects the dragon to you, why would Robert connect the dragon to me? I'm a Stark bastard." Ned's mouth closed. The closing was the answer that the words could not provide. Jon looked at his father, the man who had raised him, the man who had loved him, the man who was standing in his bastard's room at 3 in the morning with a face full of terror, and a truth that was 16 years overdue, and a dragon between them that was the proof of everything the truth contained. "I'm not a Stark bastard," Jon said. "You are a Stark, but not a bastard. Jon, not your bastard." Ned held the room, the weight of it, 16 years, one promise, one lie, one baby in a tower, pressing on him with the force of a collapsing wall. The dragon chirped. Grey wind outside the door growled at a sound he could not explain. The castle was waking. "Robb," Ned said, "take the guards. Send them to check the kitchens. Tell them the sound was a cat in the walls. Make the explanation. Buy us time." Robb looked at Jon, at the dragon, at his father. "Go, Robb." Robb went. Ned and Jon and the dragon were alone. "Your mother was Lyanna," Ned said. The room. "My sister. Your mother was Lyanna Stark." Jon held the dragon. The dragon was warm. The room was cold. The words were the temperature of a world shifting on its axis. "Lyanna was your mother. And your father." Ned closed his eyes. "Your father was Rhaegar Targaryen," the dragon chirped. The chirp was the punctuation, the small sound that confirmed the words. The creature in Jon's hands that was the living proof of the blood that Ned had been hiding for 16 years. A dragon hatched for Jon because Jon was not a Stark bastard. Jon was a Targaryen. The dragon knew it. The egg had known it. The egg had waited 16 years for the blood to come close enough to wake it, and the blood had come, and the waking had cracked open the largest secret in the 7 kingdoms, on a night when the secret's worst enemy was sleeping down the hall. "Rhaegar," Jon said. "Rhaegar Targaryen, the Crown Prince. He and Lyanna, they married. In secret. The marriage was real. You are not a bastard, Jon. You are a true-born son. A true-born Targaryen. A true-born son of a Stark and a Targaryen. Both." Jon sat on the bed. He sat because his legs were not going to hold him, and because the sitting was the only thing his body could do, while his mind processed the impossible, the identity he had carried for 16 years dissolving, the bastard disappearing, the son of the most infamous prince in the history of the 7 kingdoms, emerging from the wreckage of the name he had been given. "You lied to me," Jon said. "I protected you. You lied to everyone. To Mother. To Catelyn. To Robert. To the world. The lie kept you alive. If Robert had known, if anyone had known, you would have been killed. In the crib. As an infant. Robert's hatred of the Targaryens is total. He would have killed you and called it justice. And now, Ned looked at the dragon. And now there is a dragon, Ned said. And the dragon changes everything. The dragon chirped. The chirp was getting louder. The newborn was hungry, and hungry newborns, regardless of species, made noise. We have hours, Ned said, before dawn, before the castle wakes fully, before Robert comes down to breakfast and someone tells him that the bastard's room produced strange sounds in the night. We have hours to decide what we do. What can we do? Hide it. Send you north, beyond the wall where Robert's reach. I'm not running. Jon, I'm not running. I've spent my whole life standing at the edge of this family, looking in. I just learned that I was never outside it. I was inside it, hidden, protected by a lie. I'm not going to respond to the truth by running. The truth will kill you if Robert sees the dragon. Then Robert doesn't see the dragon, not yet. Not until we have a plan. A plan. A plan that is not hiding, and is not running, and is not pretending that a dragon didn't just hatch in Winterfell. Jon looked at his father, his uncle, the man who had kept him alive for 16 years through a lie that had cost both of them everything. You've spent 16 years protecting me from the truth. Let me spend one night protecting us from the consequences. Ned looked at his nephew, the boy who was not his son. The boy who was more his son than any biological fact could have made him, raised, loved, protected, carried through 16 years of lying for his sake. The boy who was now holding a dragon and looking at Ned with eyes that were Lyanna's eyes and Rhaegar's blood and the proof of everything Ned had been afraid of. One night, Ned said. One night. They planned. Robert, the king who saw. The plan lasted 6 hours. Ned and Jon planned through the night, hiding the dragon in the crypts, in the deepest level, in the darkness where the oldest Stark king slept and where no visitor went. The plan was to conceal the dragon until Robert left Winterfell, then deal with the consequences without a king in the castle. The plan failed because a dragon was not a quiet animal. The dragon was a newborn predator with a furnace in its chest and a voice that carried. The chirping had been contained by Jon's room's walls. The crypt's acoustics were different. The stone corridors amplified sound, channeled it, turned the small dragon's chirps into echoes that travelled up through the levels and into the corridors above. A servant heard the sound. The servant told a guard. The guard investigated. The guard found nothing. Jon had hidden the dragon deep enough that the guard did not reach the right level. But the guard told another guard. And the second guard told a Lannister man-at-arms. And the Lannister man-at-arms told Jaime Lannister because Jaime Lannister asked questions about unusual sounds, the way other men asked about the weather. The Lannisters noticed everything. That was the Lannister skill. The observation that turned every environment into an intelligence report, every conversation into a data point, every glance and gesture, an overheard whisper into the material of political advantage. Tyrion noticed first. The smallest Lannister, the dwarf, the imp, the brother that the family preferred to forget. Tyrion noticed, because Tyrion noticed everything that the rest of the family missed. Tyrion's eyes were better than Jaime's, and his ears were better than Cersei's, because Tyrion had spent his life being overlooked, and the overlooking had produced the habit of looking, the chronic attention of a man who gathered intelligence, because intelligence was the only weapon his body could carry. The bastard is hiding something, Tyrion said to Jaime, on the second morning of the visit, in the yard where Jaime was watching the Stark boys spar with the idle assessment of the greatest swordsman in the Seven Kingdoms, evaluating the next generation. Bastards always hide something. It's their nature. Not that kind of hiding. Not the usual shame and resentment hiding that bastards do in every castle in the Seven Kingdoms. This is, the boy is terrified. And the terror is new. It started last night. How do you know it started last night? Because yesterday morning he was a normal bastard, sullen, competent, invisible. This morning he's vibrating, like a man who's sitting on a secret that's too large for his body, Jaime looked at the bastard. Jon was in the yard, sparring with Robb, and Jaime's assessment was professional rather than personal. The boy was good. The boy was very good. The kind of good that came from natural talent refined by years of daily practice. But the boy was distracted. The boy was making mistakes that the boy's level of skill should not produce, the errors of a mind that was somewhere else. "He's distracted," Jaime said. "He's terrified." "Of what?" "That's the interesting question." Tyrion drank. Morning wine, the dwarf's privilege. "Something happened last night. In the bastards' quarters. The servants are talking about sounds. Animal sounds, they say. The guards investigated and found nothing. But the bastard hasn't slept, and the bastard is terrified. And the bastard's father is watching the bastard with an expression I've never seen on Ned Stark's face." "What expression?" "Fear." Jaime looked at Ned. The Lord of Winterfell was in the yard, ostensibly watching the sparring, but his attention was on Jon, the constant surveillance-level attention of a man monitoring a situation that was critical and that could not be managed openly. "Ned Stark afraid," Jaime said. "That is interesting. Interesting and potentially useful. Whatever the bastard is hiding, it frightens the most unflappable man in the North. And a frightened Ned Stark is a Ned Stark who might make mistakes. You think the worst of everyone. I think accurately of everyone. The worst is just a frequency I'm tuned to." "Something in the crypts," Jaime said to Cersei, at breakfast, at the Lord's table, where the royal family ate with the Starks, and where every word spoken was heard by 6 people and remembered by 12. "Something," Cersei said. "The guards are talking about sounds. Animal sounds. From beneath the castle. Rats. Rats don't echo like that. And rats don't make the Stark boy look like he hasn't slept." Cersei looked at Jon. The bastard was at the lower table, pale, exhausted. The face of a boy who had been awake all night with a secret that was too large for his body. The bastard looked, Cersei thought, the way people looked when they were hiding something enormous, and who were not skilled enough at hiding to make the hiding invisible. Robert heard the sounds himself on the 4th day. The king was in the crypts, visiting Lyanna's statue, the pilgrimage that Robert made every time he came to Winterfell, the mourning of the woman he had loved and lost. That was the one genuine emotion Robert Baratheon still possessed. Robert was standing before Lyanna's statue with the flowers he had brought and the grief he carried, and he heard the sound. Not a chirp anymore. The dragon was 4 days old and growing fast, faster than any natural creature, the dragon fire metabolism burning through food and converting it to growth at a rate that was magical rather than biological. The sound was not a chirp but a growl, small but a growl, the growl of a creature that was beginning to understand what it was. Robert followed the sound. Robert Baratheon, the king, the warrior, the man who had killed Rhaegar Targaryen with a warhammer at the trident, walked through the crypts of Winterfell, following a sound that he could not identify, but that his body recognized. The way a man's body recognized the sound of the thing he feared most. Robert's body knew dragons. Robert's body had fought a dynasty of dragon lords. Robert's body heard the growl, and the body knew, before the mind would admit it, what was making the sound. He found the dragon. In the lowest level of the crypts, in the darkness where the torchlight barely reached, curled in a hollow between 2 ancient tombs. The dragon was the size of a large dog now. 4 days of growth. 4 days of the accelerated metabolism that would, in months, produce a creature the size of a horse, and in years a creature the size of a castle. The dragon was dark and scaled, and its eyes were gold, and it looked at Robert with the instinct of a creature that knew, in its blood, what a Baratheon was. Robert stood in the dark, and looked at the dragon looked at Robert, and the looking was the moment that the world changed. "Ned!" Robert bellowed. The bellow carried. Through the crypts, up the stairs, through the castle, the king's voice, enormous, warforged, the voice that had rallied an army at the Trident, echoing through Winterfell with the force of a man who had just discovered the impossible. Ned came, running. with Jon behind him and Robb behind Jon, and half the castle following because the king's bellow was not a sound that was ignored. Robert was in the crypt, standing in the torchlight with his hand on his hammer, the king's warhammer that he carried everywhere, the weapon that had killed Rhaegar, the weapon that Robert's hand found instinctively when the threat was Targaryen. "What is that?" Robert said. Not a question, a demand. The king's demand, directed at the Lord of Winterfell, the demand of a man who had walked into his best friend's basement and found the one thing in the world that Robert Baratheon hated more than anything. "Robert," Ned began. "What is that?" It's a dragon. It's a dragon, Ned. In your crypts, in Winterfell." Robert's face, red, the veins visible, the fury that was Robert's primary emotion, and that was now directed not at an enemy, but at a friend. "How long?" 4 days. 4 days you've been hiding a dragon in your crypts while I'm sleeping above them. You were going to what? Tell me. When? After it grew big enough to eat my horse? Jon stepped forward. "It's mine," Jon said. Robert looked at the bastard. "Yours," Robert said. "It hatched for me. From an egg. In the crypts. It chose me." "Chose you." Robert's eyes, the blue eyes that had been warm and friendly at the feast, and that were now the eyes of a king examining a threat. "A dragon chose you. A Stark bastard." "Yes. Dragons don't choose Stark bastards. Dragons choose." Robert stopped. The stopping was different from Ned's stopping. Robert's stopping was not the stopping of a man who knew the truth and was hiding it. It was the stopping of a man whose mind was approaching a conclusion that his emotions could not accept. "Dragons choose Targaryens," Robert said. The crypt was very still. Robert looked at Jon, at Ned, at Jon again. "Ned," Robert said. The voice had changed. From the bellowing to something worse. Something quiet, controlled. The voice of a man who was processing a possibility, and who was not bellowing because the bellowing was for anger. And this was not anger. This was something colder. "Robert, is the boy mine?" "What?" "Is the bastard my blood? Some Baratheon thing? We have Targaryen blood in our line. The Baratheons are descended from. Is the boy some accident of mine that produces the blood that hatches?" "The boy is not yours, Robert." "Then whose is he?" The crypt, the tombs, the torchlight, Lyanna's statue, 20 feet away, the stone face watching the living faces with the permanent expression of the dead. Whose is he, Ned? Ned looked at his king, his friend, the man he had fought beside and lied to and loved for 20 years, the man whose hatred of the Targaryens was the axis around which Robert's identity revolved. "Lyanna's," Ned said. Robert's face. "Lyanna's boy." Not a question, not a demand. A statement. The words falling out of Robert's mouth with the weight of stones, the comprehension arriving not as a revelation but as a collapse, the foundation of everything Robert believed about his best friend crumbling. "Lyanna and Rhaegar." The name. In the crypts. In the dark. 20 feet from Lyanna's statue. Robert's hand tightened on the warhammer. "You lied to me," Robert said. "I saved his life. You lied to me. For 17 years, my best friend, my brother, lied to my face. Looked me in the eye and, Rhaegar's son, Ned, Rhaegar's son, the man who stole Lyanna, who started the war, who, his son has been in your castle. Lyanna's son, my sister's son. Rhaegar's, Lyanna's." Ned's voice, the voice that did not rise and did not bend and did not break. "My sister's dying wish. She loved him. She married him. The boy is her son. Not Rhaegar's weapon. Not a Targaryen threat. Lyanna's boy." Robert looked at Jon. The boy was standing in the crypt with a dragon at his feet, the small, dark creature that had followed Jon from the hiding place, that was pressed against Jon's leg with the possessive instinct of a newborn, bonded to its person. The boy had dark hair and grey eyes, and a face that was Lyanna's face. The face that Robert had loved. The face that Robert had gone to war for. "He looks like her," Robert said. The words were barely audible. "He looks exactly like her," Ned said. Robert held the warhammer, the weapon that had killed the boy's father, the weapon that was, in this moment, pointed at the ground, the killing end resting on the stone floor of the crypt, where Lyanna's statue watched with her permanent eyes. "I should kill him," Robert said. "You should. But you won't." "Why won't I?" "Because he's Lyanna's. And killing Lyanna's child would be the one thing you could never live with." Robert looked at the boy, at the dragon, at the statue, at the man he had called brother for 20 years, and who had been lying to him for all of them. The warhammer stayed on the ground. "Get him out of my sight," Robert said. "The boy and the thing. Get them out. Now." Ned took Jon. They left the crypt. They left the king standing alone in the dark with the warhammer and the statue and the ruins of a friendship that had been built on a lie, and that was now, like the egg, cracked beyond repair. Robert did not swing the hammer. That was the first mercy. There would not be many others. The aftermath. What the hatching broke. Robert left Winterfell the next morning. He left without the friendship. He left without the hand he had come to recruit. He left with the knowledge that his best friend had been raising the child of the man Robert had killed in the castle Robert had visited, under the name that Robert had never questioned. He left without killing Jon. This was the thing Ned had not expected. The mercy, the restraint, the Robert who looked at Lyanna's face in a boy's features and could not swing. Robert hated Targaryens. Robert had hated Targaryens for 20 years. But Robert had loved Lyanna more, and the love was the thing that stayed the hammer. The staying was not forgiveness. The staying was a pause, the king deferring the killing, because the killing required killing Lyanna's child, and the killing of Lyanna's child was the one act that Robert could not perform. The deferral was temporary. Ned knew this. Robert's restraint would last until Robert returned to King's Landing, and the Lannisters and Varys and the council got their hands on the information. Then the restraint would erode, because the restraint was emotional, and emotions eroded under political pressure. The Northern Lords arrived at Winterfell within the month, not because Ned summoned them, because the news reached them. The Whisper network that connected every holdfast and keep in the north. The chain of servants and travellers and merchants who carried information the way rivers carried water, downhill inevitably, to the places where the information pooled. A dragon. At Winterfell. Hatched by Ned Stark's bastard. The bastard who was, the rumours varied, a secret Targaryen, a sorcerer, a madman, or something the North had never seen before and could not categorise. Greatjon Umber arrived first. The Greatjon arrived everywhere first, because the Greatjon moved through the world at the speed of a man who did not believe in obstacles. He rode to Winterfell with 50 men, and a look on his face that was equal parts disbelief and something that might have been, in a less martial man, wonder. "Show me," Umber said. To Ned, in the Solar. The demand of a lord who did not believe rumours until he had verified them with his own eyes. "Jon," Ned called. Jon came to the Solar with the dragon on his shoulder. The creature was 2 weeks old and the size of a large cat, the dark scales gleaming, the gold eyes watching the enormous lord with the predator's assessment of new things in its territory. Umber stared. "Gods," Umber said. "Not gods," Ned said. "Just a dragon." Just a dragon. Ned Stark says, just a dragon the way other men say, just a horse. That is. Umber leaned forward. His hand extended toward the creature. The dragon hissed. The hiss was small, a 2-week-old predator's warning, more instinct than threat. But the hiss was accompanied by a puff of heat, the nascent fire, the furnace inside the creature, producing a burst of warm air that carried the promise of something much larger. Umber pulled his hand back. "It doesn't like strangers," Jon said. "I don't like strangers either. We have that in common." Umber looked at the dragon, at Jon, at Ned. "The rumours say the boy is Rhaegar's son. The rumours are true. I can see it, Ned. Don't insult me with the bastard story. A dragon hatched for the boy. Dragons hatch for Targaryens. The boy is a Targaryen, which means the boy is Lyanna's." Umber held the pause. "I knew your sister. I rode with your father in the rebellion. I know what Rhaegar did, or what we were told he did. The dragon tells me the story was more complicated than we were told. The story was more complicated. Then tell me, the real version. Because I marched to war for one version, and I need to know whether the version I marched for was the truth or the lie. Ned told him. The abbreviated version, enough to establish Jon's parentage without the full detail that the full telling required. The telling was painful, because every telling chipped away at the structure of lies that had kept Jon alive. Umber listened. The listening was the Umber version of processing. Silent, focused, the large man absorbing information with the thoroughness that his battlefield reputation suggested was limited to tactical situations, but that was, in fact, the Umber way of handling everything. Lyanna's boy, Umber said when Ned finished. With a dragon. Lyanna's boy, with a dragon. Well, Umber drank. The Umber drink. Large, decisive. The consumption of ale as a punctuation mark. That changes things. It changes everything. It changes the important things. The rest, Umber set down the cup. The rest is detail. The North protects its own. Lyanna's boy is the North's own. The dragon is something the North has never had, and that the North will figure out how to handle. Because the North figures out how to handle everything. That's optimistic. That's Umber. We handle things. He looked at Jon. Welcome to the North, boy. The real North. Not the bastard version. I've always been in the North, my lord. Aye. But now, the North knows you're here. Lady Mormont arrived the next day. Mage Mormont was smaller than Umber and louder in a different way. Not volume, but precision. The words landing like arrows because Mormont's speech did not waste syllables. A dragon, Mormont said, looking at the creature on Jon's shoulder. A dragon. And the boy is Targaryen. By blood. By blood and by dragon. The one confirms the other. Mormont looked at Ned. You lied. I protected. You lied. To Robert. To us. To the realm. For 17 years. Mormont held the look. I would have done the same. For my blood. For Bear Island's blood. The lying was the right thing done wrongly, and the wrongly was the only way to do it. That's Mormont. We see things clearly. Lord Manderley sent a raven rather than riding. The raven was Manderley, long, detailed, practical, the communication of a lord who processed through writing rather than speaking. The raven said, in essence, White Harbour stands with Winterfell. The dragon changes the political mathematics of the North. The mathematics should be managed rather than feared. Manderley offered his port, his treasury, and his council. The Karstarks came. The Glovers came. The Tallhearts and the Serwyns came. They came, and they saw the dragon, and they reacted the way Northern lords reacted to impossible things, with the stoic assessment that was the North's governing quality, that's different, that the North produced in place of the South's panic. The North had survived 8,000 winters. The North had faced the White Walkers. The North had built the wall. A dragon was novel. But the North did novel. The consensus formed, not immediately, not cleanly, but with the gradual northern momentum that was stronger for being slow. The consensus was, the boy is Lyanna's. The dragon is the boy's. The North protects its own. The consensus was not unanimous. Rose Bolton did not attend. Bolton sent a raven that said, in the Bolton way, exactly nothing. The acknowledgement of the news without the commitment to a position, the careful non-alignment that was Bolton's signature. And that was, to anyone who was watching, its own kind of position. Jon watched the lords come and go and react and commit, and he felt the thing that the bastard had never felt in 16 years at Winterfell. That the North was looking at him, and seeing not the bastard, but the boy. The boy with the dragon. Lyanna's boy. The boy who belonged. We have weeks, Ned said to Jon, in the solar, the morning after Robert's departure. The castle quiet. The royal party gone. Winterfell returned to the Starks. Weeks before Robert processes this. Before the court hears. Before the political machinery starts. Starts what? Starts the response. A Targaryen heir with a dragon in the north. The response will be, War? Demand. First, the demand for Jon's surrender, then the demand for the dragon's destruction. When the demands are refused, because I will refuse them, then war. You'll refuse. You're my sister's son. I've spent 17 years lying to protect you. I'm not going to hand you over now. Even if it means war. Even if it means everything. Jon held this. The uncle who had been his father. The man who was choosing war over compliance because the compliance would mean the death of Lyanna's child, and the death of Lyanna's child was the one thing Ned Stark would not accept. Thank you, Jon said. Don't thank me yet. The war hasn't started. It will. It will. Ned looked at the window. The north. The kingdom he had governed for 17 years, and that was about to become the front line of a conflict that would make Robert's rebellion look like a border skirmish. Prepare. For what? For everything. The reactions. What every faction saw. The news travelled faster than any raven. By the time Robert reached King's Landing, the 7 kingdoms already knew. The servants who had heard the sounds. The guards who had investigated. The Lannister men-at-arms who had reported to Jaime. The whisper network that every castle contained and that every court deployed. The web of information that turned private secrets into public knowledge with the efficiency of fire-consuming dry wood. A dragon in Winterfell, hatched by Ned Stark's bastard. The bastard who was not a bastard. The bastard who was Rhaegar Targaryen's son. Every faction responded. Tywin Lannister received the news at Casterly Rock and sat with it for 3 days before acting. 3 days of assessment, Tywin's process, the careful weighing of information against position, against opportunity that had governed every Lannister decision for 40 years. A Targaryen heir with a dragon, Tywin said to Kevin. In the north. Ned Stark's bastard is a Targaryen. Ned Stark's bastard is Rhaegar Targaryen's son by Lyanna Stark. The bastard story was a cover, a very effective cover, 17 years without suspicion. Tywin looked at the map. The heir to the Iron Throne, by Targaryen succession, is alive, is in the north, and has a dragon. Robert will want him dead. Robert wants him dead. Robert also has a warhammer and no dragon. The arithmetic is changing. Tywin looked at the map the way Tywin looked at everything, as a problem to be solved. The boy is a threat, but the boy is also a weapon that can be used against Robert as easily as it can be used against us. You're not thinking of, I'm thinking of everything. That's what I do. Stannis Baratheon received the news on Dragonstone and responded with the blunt legal analysis that was Stannis' approach to everything. The boy was Rhaegar's son. If the marriage was legitimate, the boy had a stronger claim to the Iron Throne than Robert, whose claim was based on conquest and on a Baratheon grandmother who was Targaryen. If the marriage was illegitimate, the boy was a bastard with a dragon, which was worse because bastards with dragons had no claim to respect and therefore no constraint on their ambition. The boy must be dealt with, Stannis said to Davos. Not killed, dealt with. A Targaryen heir with a dragon is a destabilizing force. The realm cannot absorb a destabilizing force and survive. He's a boy, my lord. He's a boy with a dragon. Boys with dragons burned Harrenhal. Varys received the news through his network and responded with the quiet satisfaction of a man whose long-term planning had just received an unexpected confirmation. Varys had known about Jon. Varys had suspected, not confirmed, but suspected, that Ned Stark's bastard was more than the story suggested. The dragon was the confirmation. The game changes, Varys murmured, to no one. In his chambers, the spider spinning a new web for a new reality. The Tyrells responded with their customary calculation. The family that joined winning sides waited to see which side was winning before committing. A dragon in the north was significant. A dragon attached to a Targaryen heir was transformative. The Tyrells would watch and calculate, and when the calculation was clear, they would act. And across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen received reports of a brother she had never known existed, a nephew who had hatched a dragon in a castle of ice, and the feeling that accompanied the knowing was not joy or solidarity, but a colder thing, The recognition that her claim to the Iron Throne, her singular, unique, last Targaryen claim, was no longer singular, no longer unique. The world was responding. The dragon had detonated, and Jon Snow, Jon Targaryen, Aegon, whatever name the world would eventually give him, was at Winterfell, raising a growing dragon, learning the truth of his blood, and preparing for the consequences of a hatching that he had not asked for and could not undo. Catelyn, what the mother felt. Catelyn learned the truth on the morning of Robert's departure. Ned told her in the solar, with the door closed, in the flat voice that Ned used when the truth was too heavy for inflection. He told her everything. The Tower of Joy, Lyanna, Rhaegar, the marriage, the baby, the lie. 17 years of lying. To his wife, to his king, to the world. Catelyn processed it in stages. The first stage was fury. Not the hot fury of a betrayal discovered, the cold fury of a woman who had spent 17 years managing a household that contained a boy she believed was her husband's bastard. A boy whose presence was a daily reminder of Ned's infidelity. A boy she had treated with the controlled distance that was the only response she could muster to the wound his existence represented. 17 years of that distance. 17 years of managing the resentment. And the boy was not Ned's bastard. The boy was Ned's nephew. The distance had been unnecessary. The resentment had been misplaced. The wound had been self-inflicted, based on a lie that Ned had maintained because the truth was too dangerous to share. 17 years, Catelyn said. You let me believe... I had to. You had to. You had to let your wife believe you had fathered a bastard on some common woman. You had to let me treat that boy, Lyanna's boy, your sister's son, with the coldness that I... She stopped. The stopping was the Tully composure asserting itself, the discipline of a woman who would not cry in front of a man she was furious with. The coldness protected him, Ned said. If you had known, if you had treated Jon as family, Robert would have noticed. Robert notices when Starks treat people differently. The coldness made the bastard story believable. My cruelty was your alibi. Your distance was the boy's shield. Don't, Catelyn held the composure. Don't make my unkindness into a virtue, Ned. I treated a child coldly for 17 years. A child who was my nephew, my good sister's son. I treated him as an intruder in his own family's home, and you let me, because the letting was convenient for your secret. Not convenient, necessary. The distinction doesn't comfort me. The second stage was grief. Not for the lie, for the boy. For the 16 years of distance that she could not take back. For the birthday feasts where Jon sat at the lower table. For the times she had looked past him, through him. The deliberate unseeing that had been her management of the resentment. She had not been cruel. She had been cold. And the coldness had been a choice. And the choice had been based on a lie. And the lie's exposure made the choice feel monstrous. Does he know? Catelyn said. He knows. I told him last night. When the dragon forced your hand. The dragon forced everything. And now, what? The boy is a Targaryen with a dragon. My children, Robb, Sansa, Arya, Bran, Rickon, my children are in a castle with a Targaryen heir who has a claim to the Iron Throne and a dragon that can enforce it. What does this mean for my children, Ned? Jon is not a threat to our children. Jon is not. The dragon is. The claim is. The world's response to the claim and the dragon is. My children are in danger because your sister's son has awakened the most dangerous thing in the world. And the danger is not the boy. I believe you. The boy is not dangerous. The danger is what the boy represents to every lord and every king and every ambitious politician who will look at the dragon and see either a weapon to control or a threat to destroy. Ned held this. I will protect our children, Ned said, and I will protect Jon. Both. That's what I've been doing for 17 years. You've been lying for 17 years. Protecting and lying are not the same thing. In this case, they were. The third stage was the hardest. The third stage was looking at Jon, actually looking at him, for the first time, without the filter of the bastard story, without the distance, without the resentment. Looking at the boy who was Lyanna's son, and seeing without the lie's distortion what she should have seen from the beginning. A Stark. A boy with Stark features and Stark composure and Stark honor. A boy who had absorbed everything Ned valued and who had endured the coldness with the grace that was, she now recognized, the same grace his mother had possessed. She went to Jon. She found him in the yard. With the dragon, the creature that was growing daily, that was now the size of a large hound, that followed Jon the way Ghost followed Jon, the two animals occupying the boy's space with the territorial possessiveness of creatures who knew their person. Jon. He looked at her. The grey eyes. Lyanna's eyes. She had spent 17 years looking at those eyes and seeing Ned's infidelity. Now she saw Lyanna. The difference was shattering. "I owe you an apology," Catelyn said. "Lady Stark. An apology that is 17 years overdue, and that no words can adequately contain." She held her composure. The Tully discipline. The fierce control of a woman who would say what needed to be said regardless of the cost. "I treated you as a reminder of a wound. You were not a wound. You were a child. You were Lyanna's child. And I treated you as my husband's mistake. And the treating was..." She stopped. Not the composure failing, the words failing. The words were not large enough for the thing she was trying to say. "It's all right," Jon said. "It is not all right. It will never be all right. But I can. Going forward, I can try to be what I should have been. Not your mother. Your family." Jon looked at the woman who had been the cold center of his childhood. The woman whose distance had defined his experience of Winterfell as much as Ned's love had. The woman who was now standing in the yard, looking at him with Tully blue eyes that were full of something he had never seen directed at him before. Regret. Genuine. Tully fierce. 16 years overdue regret. "Thank you," Jon said. "Don't thank me. I don't deserve thanks for arriving 17 years late. You arrived. That's what matters." Catelyn looked at the dragon. The dark creature. The gold eyes. The growing body that was already too large for the yard, and that would, in months, be too large for the castle. "That thing is going to change the world," Catelyn said. "I know. Are you ready?" "No." "Good. Nobody's ever ready for the things that change the world. That's how you know they're real." She left. Jon stood in the yard with the dragon and the wolf, and the weight of a name he had not known was his, and the mother's love he had not known was owed. Ned and Jon, the conversation that mattered most. In the weeks after Robert's departure, Ned told Jon everything. Not in one conversation, in many. In the Godswood, at the Heart Tree, in the evenings when the castle was quiet, and the dragon was sleeping in the Wolfswood, and the world was, for a few hours, manageable. He told Jon about Lyanna, the real Lyanna, not the legend, not the woman the song celebrated, not the figure that Robert had turned into a monument, the actual person. The girl who had been fierce and funny and who had ridden horses better than most knights, and who had fought in armor at Harrenhal because a friend was being bullied, and who had loved a prince because the prince saw her, and she saw the prince, and the seeing was mutual, in a way that neither of them could resist. She was. Ned searched. She was not what the stories say. The stories say she was beautiful. She was. But the beauty was the least interesting thing about her. She was brave. She was reckless. She was stubborn in a way that made my father tear his hair, and that made every man who met her either fall in love with her or want to strangle her. "Sounds like Arya," Jon said. Ned looked at his nephew, at Arya, who was in the yard below the Godswood, chasing Bran with a stick. "Yes," Ned said. "Arya is Lyanna. The stubbornness, the wildness, the refusal to be what the world tells her to be. When I look at Arya, I see my sister. And when you look at me, I see my sister's eyes. And behind them, Ned held the pause. Rhaegar's intelligence, Rhaegar's gravity, the weight of a man who carried the future on his shoulders and who did not know how to set it down. You make him sound... I make him sound like a man. Because he was a man. Not the monster Robert made him. Not the hero Lyanna saw. A man. A brilliant, tragic, deeply wrong man who believed that the world's fate depended on his choices, and who made choices that destroyed his dynasty and killed 100,000 people. And I'm his son. You're his son, and Lyanna's son. And Ned looked at the heart tree, and mine. Not by blood, by raising. By the 17 years of lying that kept you alive. You are my son in every way that matters, Jon. The blood is Rhaegar's. The boy is mine. Jon held this. Why did you keep the egg? Jon said. I didn't know it was an egg. You knew it was Rhaegar's. I knew it was Lyanna's. She asked me to take everything. To keep everything that belonged to the child. The stone, the egg. It was beside the bed. It was part of the bundle. I took it because she asked, and because I keep promises. And you never wondered what it was. I wondered. I assumed it was a Valyrian artifact, a curiosity, a keepsake, something Rhaegar had brought from the south. It was cold, Jon. It was dead. I held it and felt nothing. The nothing made it seem harmless. It was waiting for me. It was waiting for your blood, for the Targaryen in you. The thing that I had been hiding from the world for 16 years was the thing that the egg needed to wake up. My blood is the trigger, and my blood is the danger. Your blood is both. That's the Targaryen legacy. The fire gives and the fire takes. The dragons gave the Targaryens the 7 kingdoms. The dragons also destroyed the Targaryens. The fire is never just one thing. Jon looked at the godswood, at the weirwood face, red and carved and permanent. Am I a Stark or a Targaryen? Jon said. You're asking the wrong question. What's the right question? The right question is, what kind of man do you want to be? The blood is given. The man is chosen. Rhaegar chose the prophecy, and the prophecy destroyed him. Robert chose the hammer, and the hammer made him king, but the kingship destroyed him. Your mother chose love, and the love killed her. Ned looked at his nephew. You get to choose too. The blood doesn't choose for you. The dragon chose me. The dragon chose your blood. You choose what you do with the dragon. Jon held this. The choice. The thing that Ned was giving him that was more valuable than any name or any inheritance. The understanding that the blood was the starting point, not the destination. The blood said what you were. The choice said who you were. And the who was always more important than the what. I choose the north, Jon said. Ned looked at him. I choose the north. I'm Rhaegar's blood, and Lyanna's blood, and I have a dragon, and the dragon makes me. Important, I guess. To the south, to the politics. But I'm choosing the north. I'm choosing what you taught me. I'm choosing the old gods, and the wolves, and the people who live in the cold, and who need defending. You're 17. I know. It's a big choice for 17. It's a big choice for any age. Then it's the right size for me. Jon looked at the dragon. The dark shape in the wolfswood, visible through the trees. The creature that had changed everything, and that was, despite the changing, still the same animal that had chirped on a bed in a bastard's room 3 weeks ago. I choose the north. Whatever that costs. It will cost everything. Everything worth doing costs everything. You taught me that. I taught you a great many things. Some of them were even right. Jon almost smiled. The almost smile of a boy carrying the weight of a dynasty, and a dragon, and a secret, and a choice. Finding enough lightness to almost smile in the godswood with the man who had made the boy possible. Thank you, Jon said. For everything. For the lying. For the keeping. For the 17 years of being my father, when you could have been anything else. I couldn't have been anything else. Your mother made me promise. And you keep promises. I keep promises. They sat under the heart tree, the uncle and the nephew, the father and the son. The two Starks who carried a secret that had become a dragon, and a dragon that had become a future, and a future that was arriving faster than either of them could prepare for. But the preparing was happening, and the choosing was done. The world was changing. The dragon was growing. The future was arriving faster than Jon could prepare for it. But the preparing was starting, and the starting was enough. Robert, the brother who watched. Robb's response to Jon's transformation was the most complicated reaction in Winterfell, because Robb's response was not one thing. It was 5 things happening simultaneously, and the 5 things contradicted each other. The first thing was love. Robb loved Jon. The love was real and unqualified, and had been the foundation of their relationship since childhood. The brothers who sparred and rode and shared everything that brothers shared. The love was not threatened by the dragon. The love was older than the dragon, and stronger than the dragon, and the dragon did not change it. The second thing was amazement. A dragon. His brother had a dragon. The absurdity and the wonder of it. A living dragon. The creature of legends, growing in the wolfswood behind Winterfell. And his brother was the one who had hatched it. The amazement was the child in Robb responding to the impossible with the only appropriate emotion. Awe. The third thing was fear. Not of Jon, of what Jon represented. A Targaryen heir with a dragon was the most dangerous political object in the Seven Kingdoms. The danger was not Jon's intent. Robb trusted Jon's intent completely. But the world's response. The world would see the dragon, and the claim and the danger, and the world would respond with the tools the world possessed. Armies and assassins, and the political machinery that turned threats into targets. The fourth thing was, Robb did not want to name the fourth thing. The fourth thing was the feeling that lived underneath the love and the amazement and the fear, the feeling that Robb was ashamed of, because the feeling was ugly, and the ugliness was not worthy of a Stark. The fourth thing was envy. Not of the dragon, of the transformation. For 16 years, Robb had been the heir, the firstborn, the Stark, the boy who would inherit Winterfell and govern the north and carry the family name. Jon had been the bastard, the second, the lesser, the boy who would always stand one step behind Robb, because the step was the distance that legitimacy created. The dragon erased the step. The dragon did not just elevate Jon, it launched him past Robb, past the Starks, past every lord in the Seven Kingdoms, into a position that Robb could never reach regardless of his birth or his training or his abilities. Jon had a dragon. Robb had a wolf. The wolf was magnificent, and the dragon was incomparable, and the incomparability was the thing that turned the step into a chasm. The fifth thing was guilt. Guilt about the fourth thing. Guilt about feeling envy toward a brother who had never asked for the dragon, who had not chosen the transformation, who was clearly overwhelmed by the consequences. Guilt about the ugliness of envying a man whose life had just become exponentially more dangerous and more complicated. Guilt about the Stark in him, the Stark who should have been better than envy, and who was discovering, in the presence of a dragon, that Starks were human. "I'm a terrible person," Robb said to Jon, 2 weeks after the hatching, in the Wolfswood, watching the dragon eat a deer. "What? I'm jealous of you." Of that he gestured at the dragon. "I'm jealous, and I feel terrible about it." Jon looked at his brother. "You're jealous of the thing that has made me the most hunted person in the Seven Kingdoms. I'm jealous of the spectacle, the power, the having something nobody else has. Yes, you're jealous of a creature that makes everyone I meet either want to kill me or use me. A creature that has turned my father's, my uncle's, secret into a political crisis. A creature that has made the woman who raised me apologize for 17 years of treating me badly. You're jealous of that? When you put it that way, when I put it anyway, Robb, you're the heir to Winterfell. You're going to be the Lord of Winterfell, the Warden of the North, the head of the most respected house in the Seven Kingdoms. You have a name, a place, a family that claims you, a future that is clear and honored and safe. I have a dragon and a death sentence. That's dramatic. That's accurate. Robert Baratheon is going to send men to kill me. Maybe not today. Maybe not this month. But eventually. Because I'm Rhaegar's son, and I have a dragon, and the combination is the thing Robert has been having nightmares about for 17 years. Robb held this. I'm sorry, Robb said, for the jealousy. Don't be sorry. Be honest. The jealousy is... it's human. It would be strange if you didn't feel it. A dragon hatched in your family's castle for your brother, not you. The feeling is normal. It doesn't feel normal. Nothing about this feels normal. Jon looked at the dragon. But the jealousy is the easy part. The hard part is what comes next. What comes next? I don't know. That's the hard part. They stood in the Wolfswood. The two brothers, the heir and the dragon rider, the legitimate son and the hidden prince. The relationship had changed. Not broken, changed. The easy brotherhood of equals had been replaced by something more complicated, something that included love and amazement and fear and envy and guilt, and the effort, the daily effort, of maintaining a brotherhood across a gap that a dragon had created. The effort was the thing that made them Starks. Not the name, the effort. The willingness to hold the relationship even when the holding was hard. The growing. What the dragon became. The dragon grew fast. Fast was the wrong word. Fast implied a rate that could be measured and compared. The dragon's growth was not measured. It was observed with increasing alarm by a household that had no experience with dragons, and that was therefore calibrating the growth against the only references it had. The historical accounts, which described dragons that took years to reach riding size, and the reality, which was producing a creature that was growing at a rate the historical accounts had not documented. The dragon was the size of a hound at 1 week, the size of a horse at 2 months, the size of a cart at 4 months. The growth was accelerating, the dragonfire metabolism burning through food and converting it into scale and muscle, and wing at a rate that was not biological, but magical. The ancient fires inside the creature producing the growth that nature alone could not. Jon learned to raise a dragon the way every parent learned to raise anything, through mistakes. The first mistake was feeding. Jon assumed the dragon would eat raw meat, deer, rabbit, the game that the Wolfswood provided. The dragon did eat raw meat, but the dragon preferred cooked meat, not cooked by a kitchen, cooked by itself. The dragon would hold a haunch of venison in its claws and breathe on it until the meat was charred on the outside and warm on the inside. The cooking instinct bred into the creature's behavior, the fire serving the domesticity before it served the warfare. The second mistake was housing. Jon kept the dragon in his room for the first week, the small room, the bastard's quarters, the space that had barely been large enough for a boy and a wolf, and that was now expected to contain a boy, a wolf, and a growing predator. The room was not large enough. The dragon's body heat raised the temperature to the point where Jon's water pitcher boiled. The dragon's claws scratched the stone floor. The dragon's tail, swinging in sleep, knocked over the furniture. By the second week, the dragon was in the Wolfswood. Not the deep Wolfswood, the edge, the transitional forest where the castle's maintained grounds gave way to the wild. Jon built a shelter, not a cage, never a cage, a lean-to of logs and branches that the dragon could use or ignore as it chose. The dragon used it. The shelter became the dragon's den, the place where the creature slept and ate and grew. The third mistake was training. Jon assumed, based on the histories, that a dragon could be trained the way a horse was trained, through commands, through repetition, through the imposition of a rider's will on the animal's behavior. The assumption was wrong. The dragon wasn't trainable. The dragon was negotiable. The distinction was the difference between commanding and persuading, between ordering and requesting, between a master and a partner. The dragon would not fly when Jon told it to fly. The dragon flew when the dragon wanted to fly. And if Jon happened to be on its back at the time, the dragon tolerated the passenger. The dragon would not breathe fire on command. The dragon breathed fire when the dragon was angry or hungry or frightened, and the breathing was the dragon's decision, not Jon's. Jon learned this the hard way. In the third week, he tried to direct the dragon's fire at a target, a dead tree, chosen for practice. He pointed. He commanded. The dragon looked at the dead tree, looked at Jon, looked at the tree again. Then the dragon breathed fire in the opposite direction. Not at the tree, at a rock, 50 feet behind Jon. The fire hitting the stone with a burst of heat that cracked the rock and sent fragments flying. The message was clear. I do not take orders. I do not take direction. I am not your weapon. I am your partner. And partners do not point. Jon stopped pointing. He started asking. Not verbally, through the bond, the warg connection that was growing stronger with each day. The channel between the boy's mind and the dragon's mind that carried impressions rather than words. He sent the impression of the target, the impression of the fire, the impression of the request. The dragon considered the request. For 3 seconds, an eternity, for a creature whose instincts operated at the speed of fire. Then the dragon turned and breathed at the tree. The tree exploded. You asked, Jon said. The dragon's gold eyes held something that was amusement and not compliance, but the recognition of a man who had learned the right way to communicate. I'll keep asking, Jon said. The dragon closed its eyes. Partnership. The growth created problems. The first problem was feeding. The dragon ate enormously. The Wolfswood's deer population declined visibly in the first month, the predator at the top of the food chain consuming at a rate that the ecosystem could not sustain. Robb organized hunting parties, not for sport, but for dragon feeding, the systematic harvesting of game that was the most bizarre logistics operation in the history of the North. I'm organizing cattle shipments to feed a dragon, Robb said to Jon, reviewing the supply figures. This is my life now. Welcome to the consequences of my existence. Your existence used to cost a seat at the lower table. Now it costs 300 cattle a month. The second problem was concealment. A dragon the size of a horse could not be hidden in the Wolfswood. The creature was visible from the air, if anyone had been looking from the air, from the Wolfswood's edges, from the roads that bordered the forest. The dragon flew, short flights at first, the young creature testing its wings, the flights growing longer and higher as the wings grew. Jon's first flight happened in the 4th month. The dragon was the size of a cart, large enough to carry a rider, large enough to sustain flight with weight on its back. Jon had been climbing onto the dragon for weeks, sitting on the broad back while the creature was grounded, feeling the muscles underneath the scales, the volcanic heat radiating through his clothing, the bond humming between them. The flight was the dragon's decision, not Jon's. Jon was sitting on the dragon's back in the Wolfswood, the morning cold, Ghost watching from a distance that the wolf maintained as the minimum safe proximity to the creature that had displaced him. Jon was sitting, and the dragon was resting, and the morning was ordinary. The dragon stood. The standing was the first warning. The dragon's body shifting underneath Jon, the coiling of muscles, the redistribution of weight, the preparation that was visible in every scale and every sinew, the wings extending, slowly at first, then with the snap of full deployment, the 60-foot wingspan filling the clearing. Wait, Jon said. The dragon did not wait. The launch was vertical. The dragon leaped, the hindquarters driving the body upward with the explosive power of a creature that was built for the sky and that had been waiting 4 months to return to it. The ground dropped. The trees dropped. The wolfswood dropped. The canopy shrinking below Jon's feet with a speed that his stomach could not process. Jon grabbed the shoulder ridges. The grip was instinctive, the hands finding the holds that the body had mapped during weeks of sitting, the fingers locking around the bone spurs that ran along the dragon's spine. The grip held. The grip was all that held because everything else, Jon's stomach, Jon's breath, Jon's capacity for rational thought, was in free fall. The dragon broke through the canopy, through the morning mist, into the clear sky above the wolfswood, the sky that was vast and cold and empty, and that was, from this height, the most beautiful thing Jon had ever seen. Winterfell was below. The castle, his castle, the only home he had ever known, was below him, shrunk to the size of a model. The walls and towers and the great hall, and the godswood, and the yards, and the kitchen, and the bastards' quarters all reduced to the miniature version of a life that, from up here, looked manageable. The cares of the ground were small from the sky. The politics and the fear and the hiding and the identity crisis that consumed every waking hour, small. From the sky, the only thing that was large was the sky itself. The dragon levelled. The wings found the rhythm, the steady, powerful beat that moved the massive body through the air with a speed that was not wind speed, but beyond wind speed. The velocity of a creature that was designed for the atmosphere and that moved through it the way a fish moved through water, naturally, effortlessly, at home. Jon felt the bond surge, the channel between his mind and the dragon's mind, the war connection that had been growing for 4 months. The channel opened fully in the air. The dragon's consciousness flowed through the bond and into Jon, and Jon's consciousness flowed back, and the flowing was the completion of the bonding, the final step that required the sky, because the sky was where the dragon was, most itself, and the most itself was where the bond was strongest. Jon saw through the dragon's eyes. Not literally. The seeing was not visual, but perceptual. The awareness of the dragon's experience overlaying Jon's own. The dragon saw the world differently. The dragon saw heat, the thermal currents, the warm spots on the ground where the volcanic activity ran beneath the surface, the cold spots where the winter was deepest. The dragon saw movement, the animals below, the birds around, the winds that the human eyes could not see, but that the dragon's wings could feel. The dragon saw the world as a map of fire, and the map was beautiful. They flew for an hour, over the Wolfswood, over the last river, over the northern country that was Jon's by blood, both kinds, and by choice. They flew, and the flying was the thing that the dragon had given Jon that nothing else could provide. The perspective, the god's eye view, the seeing of the world from above that made the world's problems look like what they were. Problems, not catastrophes. Manageable, solvable, small, from the height that only a dragon could reach. The landing was harder than the launch. The dragon descended in a spiral, the wide circling that reduced altitude gradually, the wings adjusting the angle with each revolution. The ground returned, the trees, the clearing, the wolf at the edge. The ground was the same ground Jon had left an hour ago, but the man who landed was not the same man who had launched. The man who landed had seen the world from above, and the seeing had changed him in ways that the ground could not measure and that the sky could not explain. Ghost was waiting. The white wolf, the red eyes, the patient companion who had watched the dragon take his person into the sky and who had waited for the returning. Ghost pressed against Jon's leg when Jon dismounted, the pressure that said, "You went up. You came back. Don't do that again." "I'm going to do that again," Jon said. Ghost growled. "I know," Jon said. "I know." The flights were visible. The flights produced sightings, travellers, merchants, the inevitable witnesses who looked up and saw the dark shape against the northern sky, and who did not believe what they were seeing until they told someone else who had seen the same thing. The concealment was not possible. Ned had known this from the beginning. The dragon's existence could not be hidden indefinitely. The hatching had occurred in front of witnesses. Robert knew. The Lannisters knew. The secret was not a secret. It was a fact, and facts spread regardless of the wishes of the people they belonged to. The third problem was the most unexpected. Ghost. Jon's direwolf and Jon's dragon did not get along. The two creatures occupied overlapping territory, Jon's space, Jon's attention, Jon's person. The overlap produced competition. Ghost growled at the dragon hissed at Ghost. The two animals circled each other with the territorial hostility of predators who had been given the same resource, Jon, and who were not equipped to share. "They're jealous of each other," Arya said, watching the standoff from a safe distance. Arya, at 10, was the only member of the family who approached the dragon without fear, because Arya approached everything without fear, and because the dragon, which was still young enough to imprint on people who were not afraid, had decided that the small, fierce girl was acceptable. They're establishing dominance, Jon said. They're jealous. Ghost has been your wolf for 5 years. The dragon showed up, and now Ghost is sharing. Ghost doesn't share. Dragons don't share either. Then you've got a problem. Jon had a problem. The problem was not just the animals, the problem was the metaphor. Ghost was the North. Ghost was Stark. Ghost was the white wolf, the albino, the creature that was different from the rest, but that was, fundamentally, of the North. The dragon was. The dragon was everything the North was not. Fire. Heat. The South. Valyria. Targaryens. The dragon was the proof of Jon's other blood, the blood that the North did not share and did not trust. The two animals' conflict was the family's conflict in miniature, the Stark identity and the Targaryen identity, the ice and the fire, the two halves of Jon that the dragon's hatching had exposed and that Jon was going to have to learn to hold together. You can't choose between them, Robb said, watching the standoff from the yard. I know. You must not choose between them. If you choose the dragon, if you become the dragon rider, the expense of the wolf blood, you lose the North. If you choose the wolf at the expense of the dragon, if you try to be a Stark by denying the Targaryen, you lose the power that the dragon provides. Both. Both. Always both. The man who holds the ice and the fire at the same time. That sounds exhausting. Everything worth doing is exhausting. Father taught us that. Jon held both. Ghost on one side, the dragon on the other. The bastard, the prince, the boy, the man, standing between the two creatures that represented the two halves of his blood, and learning, through the daily practice of holding both, the thing that his parents' story had been trying to teach, that ice and fire were not opposites, they were complements, and a man who held both was not divided. He was complete. The war that wasn't. What the dragon prevented. Robert sent the demand in the 3rd month. The raven came to Winterfell with the royal seal and the king's words. Surrender the Targaryen bastard and the dragon to the crown's justice. Failure to comply will be considered treason. Ned read the demand. He read it twice. He put it in the fire. The demand is refused, Ned said. To Jon, to Robb, to Catelyn, to the household. The North will not surrender one of its own to a southern king's vengeance. The refusal was the declaration, not of war, of independence, not formally, not with the ancient title, not with the great Jon's bellow. The refusal was the drawing of a line, the Stark line, the line beyond which the Iron Throne's authority did not extend, the line that said, come north and test us. Robert did not come north. Robert did not come north because Robert was not stupid. Robert was drunk and grief-stricken and furious, but Robert was not stupid. Robert understood. Tywin made sure Robert understood that marching north against a Stark household that possessed a dragon was the definition of military suicide. The dragon changes the mathematics, Tywin wrote to Robert, in a letter that was not a letter, but a strategic assessment disguised as counsel. The boy's dragon is young, but growing. In 6 months, it will be large enough to destroy an army. In a year, it will be large enough to destroy a kingdom. The window for conventional military action is closing. If conventional military action is to be attempted, it must be attempted now, before the window closes entirely. Robert did not attempt military action. Robert did not attempt military action because Ned had sent ravens of his own. To the Riverlands, the Tullys, Catelyn's family. To the Vale, the Arryns who still remembered their foster son's honour. To the North's bannermen. The ravens said the same thing. The North stands together. An attack on Winterfell is an attack on every northern house. The dragon is under Stark protection. The political mathematics were clear. The North, with a dragon, was unassailable. The Riverlands, allied to the North through Catelyn, would not permit passage for a royal army heading north. The Vale was neutral, but sympathetic. The calculus said, leave the North alone. Tywin redirected. Tywin always redirected. The lion did not charge into unfavourable terrain. Tywin advocated for containment. Let the dragon grow in the north. Monitor it. Prepare defences, scorpion bolts, the Dornish model, the anti-dragon fortifications that had once brought down Meraxes. Wait for the dragon rider to make a mistake. Because dragon riders always made mistakes, and the mistake would provide the opportunity. The war that should have happened, Robert's Rebellion. Part 2, the Southern Army marching north to kill the Targaryen heir, did not happen because the dragon made it impossible. This was the dragon's first gift. The deterrence. The prevention of a war through the existence of a weapon too terrible to test. The dragon sitting in the Wolfswood was the most effective peacekeeping force in the history of the Seven Kingdoms. And the effectiveness came not from the burning, but from the not burning, the latent threat, the unused fire, the shadow on the ground that said, "Do not come here." Jon learned from this. He learned that power's greatest use was its non-use. He learned that a dragon that never burned was more valuable than a dragon that burned constantly. He learned that deterrence was not cowardice. It was the most sophisticated form of strength. The understanding that the weapon's existence was the weapon's purpose. He learned these things the way he learned everything. By watching, by listening, by the careful observation of consequences that was the bastard's gift, the outsider's skill, the habit of a boy who had spent his life watching the family he belonged to from the edge of the family's circle. The edge was expanding. The circle was widening. The bastard was becoming something else. But the becoming was not complete. The becoming required one more thing. The thing that the dragon had been hatched for. The purpose that was not the war, or the politics, or the deterrence, but the older purpose, the ancient purpose. The reason that a dragon egg had been dormant in Winterfell's crypts for 16 years and had chosen this moment to wake. The purpose was coming from the north. The long night. What fire was for. The White Walkers came in the first true winter of the dragon's life. The reports were the same reports they were always. The disappearances, the cold, the dead rising, the walls' warnings, the Night's Watch's desperate ravens, the understaffed fortress begging for help against a threat that the South dismissed as fairy tales and that the North dismissed as northern exaggeration. Jon did not dismiss. Jon had been born for this, not politically, not dynastically, but literally. The dragon egg had sat dormant for 16 years and had hatched in the year that the White Walkers began their advance. The timing was not coincidence. The timing was purpose. The egg had known. The ancient Targaryen magic that had created the egg had known that the long night was coming, and that the long night required fire, and that the fire required a Targaryen to carry it. Not a southern Targaryen. Not Daenerys, who was across the narrow sea, with her own dragons and her own war. A northern Targaryen. A Targaryen with Stark blood. A Targaryen who understood ice because ice was in his blood, the way fire was in his blood. Both, always both. The man who held the two forces because the holding was the purpose. The dragon was meant for this, Jon said to Ned. In the solar, the ravens from the wall spread across the desk, the reports of the advancing dead, the urgent pleas of the Night's Watch. You don't know that. I know that a dragon egg sat in Winterfell's crypts for 16 years and hatched in the year the White Walkers started marching. I know that the egg was Rhaegar's, my father's, and that Rhaegar believed in the prophecy, the prince that was promised, the song of ice and fire. Prophecies are words, but the dragon is real, and the White Walkers are real. And I am the only person in the world who has both fire and ice in his blood, and I have a dragon, and the dragon hatched now. Jon looked at the ravens. This is what I'm for. Not the politics, not the crown, not the Game of Thrones. This. Ned looked at his nephew, the boy who had been a bastard, the boy who had been a secret, the boy who was now a man with a dragon and a purpose that was larger than any throne or any kingdom. Your mother would agree with you, Ned said. Would she? Lyanna believed in Rhaegar's vision. She believed, she told me in the tower, in the last moments, she believed the child was important. Not for the crown, for the future. The future is here. Then go meet it. Jon marched north with the dragon. Not alone, with Robb, with the Northern Army, with the Night's Watch and the wildlings who had been driven south by the advancing dead and who were now, improbably, fighting beside the men who had been their enemies for 8,000 years, because the enemy behind them was worse than the enemy in front of them. The dragon was full grown now. A year of growth, the accelerated metabolism, the dragonfire furnace, had produced a creature that was 40 feet from nose to tail, with a wingspan of 60, the dark scales shifting in the northern light, the gold eyes burning. Not the largest dragon in history, not Balerion, not Vagar, but real, and present, and flying above the wall with Jon on its back and the fire in its throat and the purpose in its blood. Jon flew north ahead of the army. The flying was different now, not the joy flights of the Wolfswood, not the training runs that had built his skill and his confidence. This was a war flight. The dragon beneath him was tense, the muscles coiled, the fire building in the chest, the ancient creature's instincts activated by the presence of the thing the dragon had been designed to fight. The dragon knew. Through the bond, Jon felt the dragon's recognition, the awareness, deeper than individual memory, the species memory that said, "This enemy is old. This enemy was here before me. This enemy is the reason I exist." The dragon had been born to fight the cold, not metaphorically, literally. The volcanic fire that sustained the creature, the heat that had kept it alive in the frozen north for centuries, or millennia, or since the Dawn Age, when dragons were common and the others were the enemy. The fire was the opposite of the cold. The fire was the weapon. The dragon was the delivery system. And the enemy was here. Jon felt the cold before he saw the dead. The cold was physical, not the ordinary cold of the north, not the winter cold that Jon had grown up with. This cold was wrong. This cold carried malice, the supernatural temperature that the others produced, the cold that was not the absence of heat, but the presence of ice magic, the weapon of a species that was built from winter, the way dragons were built from fire. The dragon felt the cold too. The dragon's response was immediate and visceral. Heat. The internal furnace surging, the volcanic fire building in the chest cavity, the creature's body producing more heat than it had ever produced, the instinctive response of a fire creature to the presence of its opposite number. Then Jon saw the dead. The army of the dead spread across the landscape below like a stain, from the wall's base northward, covering the land as far as Jon could see. Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. The dead of 1,000 years, gathered and animated by the others' magic. The blue-eyed corpses marching south with the patient inevitability of a wave approaching a shore. The wall was ahead. 700 feet of ice, stretching from horizon to horizon, and the wall was failing. The cold was attacking the ice itself, the others' magic working against the wall's magic, the supernatural cold eating at the supernatural ice, the two ancient forces grinding against each other while the men on top of the wall, 800 men, 800 against 100,000, fought with swords and arrows, and the desperate courage of men who knew they were dying. "Robb," Jon said, into the wind. His brother was below, on the wall's top, leading the defense, the king in the north, standing on the wall's edge, with Grey Wind beside him, and the northern army spread along the wall's length. Robb could not hear Jon. Jon could see Robb. The dragon dove. Not a controlled descent, a dive. The dragon folding its wings and dropping from altitude with the speed of a falling mountain. The air screaming past Jon's face with the force of a storm, the ground rushing up with the violence of impact. The dragon opened its wings at 200 feet. The deceleration was brutal. Jon's body slammed forward against the shoulder ridges, the force of the arrested dive compressing his spine and blurring his vision. The dragon leveled, low, 50 feet above the ground, flying north over the wall and into the dead. The dragon breathed. The fire was the thing that justified everything. Blue-white, volcanic, hotter than any fire the world had produced since the doom of Valyria. The fire poured from the dragon's throat in a river, not a burst, not a single exhalation, but a sustained flow of heat that lasted 10 seconds and covered 200 yards of ground and turned everything in its path to ash. The dead burned. The burning was not the slow ignition of living things. The dead were dry, frozen, the preserved corpses of 1,000 years of collection. They burned instantly. The blue-white fire hit the frozen bodies, and the bodies ignited, and the ignition was total. The fire consuming the corpse and the magic that animated it simultaneously, the heat defeating the cold, the fire unmaking the ice. Jon flew over the army of the dead, and the dragon breathed, and the dead burned, and the burning cleared a swathe through the army that was 200 yards wide and a mile long. The swath was visible from the wall. Robb could see it. The northern soldiers could see it. The 800 men of the Night's Watch could see the line of fire cutting through the army that had been unstoppable, and that was now, for the first time, stoppable. The dead did not react. The dead did not run, or scatter, or seek cover. The dead continued marching, the blue eyes unchanged, the frozen bodies moving into the fire with the mechanical persistence of things that did not understand fear. This made the burning easier and harder simultaneously. Easier because the targets did not evade. Harder because the non-evasion made the burning feel less like combat and more like clearing. Systematic. Mechanical. The fire applied to the dead the way a plough was applied to a field. Jon flew pass after pass. The dragon's fire was not infinite. The creature needed to rest between exhalations, the furnace recharging for 30 seconds before the next breath. In the gaps, Jon circled, the dragon climbing for altitude. Jon looking down at the devastation and seeing the pattern. The swaths of ash cut through the army of the dead. The geometric lines of destruction that the dragon's passes were producing. The others responded. 3 of them. The pale ice creatures. The White Walkers. The commanders of the dead army. They moved toward the dragon's landing zone with the cold precisions of beings that were not panicking but calculating. The ancient intelligence behind the blue eyes, assessing the new threat and formulating a response. The response was ice. A White Walker raised its hand and the air condensed, the moisture freezing instantly. The supernatural cold producing a spear of ice that was not carved but grown. The weapon appearing from nothing with the speed of magic. The ice spear flew at the dragon. Jon felt the dragon's awareness, the warning, the instinct, the predator's recognition of an incoming threat. The dragon banked, hard, the wings tilting, Jon's body thrown sideways against the shoulder ridges, the ice spear passing through the space the dragon had occupied a heartbeat before. The spear missed. The dragon's response was immediate. The fire hit the White Walker, not the sustained river of flame that the dragon used against the dead, but a concentrated burst, a focused blast that was hotter and smaller and directed at a single target. The fire hit the walker, and the walker did not burn. The ice magic met the dragon fire, and the two forces cancelled. Not explosion, not destruction, but neutralization. The heat and the cold annihilating each other in a burst of steam that filled the air with the smell of something ancient dying. The walker was not destroyed. The walker was driven back, staggering, the ice armor cracking. The creature that had been invulnerable to steel shown to be vulnerable to dragonfire. The vulnerability not lethal, but real. The walker retreated. The others retreated. The dead faltered. The animated corpses losing their animation as the commanders withdrew. The magic that kept them moving, fading as the source of the magic moved north. The dead fell. Not dramatically, they simply stopped. The blue eyes dimming. The frozen bodies returning to the death they had been stolen from. Thousands of corpses, standing and then not standing. The army dissolving as the others retreated and took their magic with them. The battle was over. Not the war. The others were not destroyed. The others retreated north into the frozen wasteland, into the ice that was their home and their fortress, and the place where even a dragon could not follow. The retreat was a tactical withdrawal, not a defeat. The others would return, in years or decades or centuries, when the conditions were favorable and the defense was weaker. But the immediate battle was won. The wall held. The dead were burned. The living survived. Jon landed the dragon on the wall. The wall's top was narrow for a dragon, the creature's wings extending past the edges, the dragon's body occupying the entire width of the passage. Jon dismounted. His legs were shaking. The flight had lasted 2 hours, the longest and most intense flight of his life. The physical and mental effort of directing fire against an army draining him to the point of collapse. Robb was there, running along the wall's top, grey wind beside him, the king in the north covered in frost and sweat, and the evidence of a battle fought with swords, while his brother fought with fire. Jon. Robb. Robb embraced him. On the wall, in the cold, the two brothers, the wolf and the dragon, the king and the prince, the brothers who had grown up sparring in a yard and who had just fought a battle against the dead, holding each other on top of the wall while the northern army cheered and the dragon steamed and the dawn broke over a world that was, for the moment, saved. "You did it," Robb said. "We did it. You flew against an army of the dead on a dragon. I stabbed things with a sword. The contributions were not equal. The contributions were necessary. Both. That's generous. That's accurate. The wall held. The dead were gone. The living breathed. The battle for the wall was the battle that justified the dragon's existence. The dead came in waves, thousands, tens of thousands. The army of frozen corpses, driven by the other's magic. The blue-eyed dead, marching against the wall with the patience of things that did not tire. The wall held barely. The 800 men of the Night's Watch fighting beside Robb's army and the wildling allies and the combined desperate force of every living thing that wanted to continue living. And above them, the dragon flew. Jon rode the dragon above the wall and breathed fire into the army of the dead, and the dead burned. The burning was not the ox-cross burning, not the horror of men dying in their tents. This was the burning of things already dead, the fire returning the corpses to the death they had been stolen from, the dragonfire doing the thing that dragonfire was designed to do, unmake the unmaking. The fire was beautiful. In the northern dark, against the ice and the snow and the grey sky, the dragonfire was beautiful. The blue-white heat cutting through the cold. The lines of flame across the dead. The ancient opposition of fire and ice manifested in a single battle above the wall. Jon flew and burned, and the dead fell, and the others retreated. The pale ice creatures driven back by the fire they could not withstand. The ancient enemy, repelled by the ancient weapon that the Targaryens had carried for 300 years, and that was now in a Stark's hands, being used for the purpose the Starks had guarded for 8,000 years. The wall held. The long night was pushed back. Not ended, the others were not destroyed, the ancient threat was not eliminated, but pushed back, contained. The immediate crisis resolved by the combination of swords and strategy and dragonfire that was, Jon knew, the combination that would be needed again, in other years, in other generations. The dragon was not a permanent solution. The dragon was a generation's defense. The next generation would need its own. But this generation had its defense. And the defense was a boy from Winterfell who carried ice and fire in his blood, and who had used both. The choice. What Jon chose. Jon returned to Winterfell from the wall, and the return was the opposite of every return he had made before. Before, the returns had been quiet. The bastard coming home. The boy who belonged and didn't belong. The face at the edge of the family that was seen but not celebrated. This return was different. The Northern Army marched through Winterfell's gates with Jon at its head. Not at the head. Beside Robb. The two brothers riding side by side. The king and the prince. The wolf and the dragon. The dragon flew overhead. The creature that had saved the wall was circling Winterfell in the late afternoon light, the dark scales catching the winter sun, the wingspan casting a shadow across the castle that was, for the first time, not frightening. The shadow was protective. The shadow had burned the dead. The shadow was the reason the people in the castle below were alive. The small folk came out to watch. Not with fear, with awe. The distinction was the thing that the wall battle had changed. Before the wall, the dragon was a threat. After the wall, the dragon was a shield. The same creature, the same fire, the same impossible power, viewed differently because the power had been used for the people, rather than against them. Jon dismounted in the courtyard. Ghost was at his side immediately, the white wolf pressing against his leg with the possessive intensity of a creature that had been separated from its person for too long. The dragon landed in the wolf's wood. The two animals occupying their respective territories, the wolf at the castle and the dragon at the forest, the boundary that Jon had maintained between his two natures. Ned was in the courtyard. The uncle, the father, the man who had kept the secret. Ned was standing in Winterfell's courtyard, watching his nephew ride home from a battle against the dead on a dragon. And Ned's face was doing the thing that Ned's face did when the man behind it was experiencing an emotion too large for the face to contain. Nothing. The stark composure. The wall between the man and the world. But behind the wall, visible only to the people who knew where to look, the thing that fathers felt when their sons came home from war. Relief. "You came home," Ned said. "I promised." "You look terrible." "I know. 2 hours of dragon fire against an army of the dead is not a beauty treatment." Ned embraced him, in the courtyard, in front of the household and the soldiers, and the northern lords, and the people who had spent 17 years watching Ned Stark treat his bastard with the careful distance that the bastard story required. The embrace was the end of the distance. "Welcome home, Jon," Ned said. "Thank you, father." The word, father, was the word that Ned had earned through 17 years of lying, and that Jon had chosen to give despite the truth. The word was not a denial of Rhaegar. The word was an acknowledgement of Ned, the man who had raised him, the man who had protected him, the man who was in every way that mattered, his father. Catelyn was behind Ned, watching. The Tully face, the face that had managed the distance for 17 years, and that had apologized for the managing, and that was now watching the bastard, who was not a bastard, ride home from a battle that had saved the world. She did not embrace Jon. Not yet. The 17 years were too heavy for a courtyard embrace, but she stood. She was present. She was visible. And the visibility was its own kind of embrace, the Tully woman saying through her presence, the thing that words could not contain. "I see you. I see who you are. I am here." Arya had no such restraint. Arya threw herself at Jon with the abandon of a 10-year-old who had watched her brother fly on a dragon against an army of the dead, and who had spent the entire battle convinced that he was going to die, and who was now in the courtyard, expressing the relief through the only mechanism a 10-year-old possessed, full-body impact. "You're alive," Arya said, into Jon's chest. "I'm alive. Don't ever do that again." "I'll probably do it again." "Then take me with you." "You're 10. I'm fierce." "You're fierce. You're also 10. When I'm older, when you're older, we'll discuss it. Promise." "I promise." Arya released him. Jon looked at the courtyard, at the family, at Ned and Catelyn and Robb and Arya and Bran and Sansa and Rickon and the household that had been his for 17 years, and that was now, for the first time, fully his. Not the bastard's version, not the outsider's version, the full version. The family that had been his all along, and that the dragon had proved, and the wall had earned. After the wall, the world offered Jon everything. The Iron Throne. The Northern Lords, watching the dragon rider who had saved the wall, suggested it. The Southern Lords, hearing the reports of a Targaryen heir who had single-handedly turned the tide against the dead, considered it. The political mathematics were clear. A Targaryen with a dragon, and a Stark's honor, and the gratitude of a realm saved from the Long Night, the man could take any throne in the world. Jon refused. He refused in the great hall of Winterfell, before the Northern Lords, before Robb, before Ned, before the family that was his by blood and by choice. "I'm not a king," Jon said. "I'm not a conqueror. I'm not a Targaryen who wants a throne. I am a Targaryen by blood, yes. But I am a Stark by raising and by choice. The dragon is mine. The dragon will stay with me. But the dragon is not a weapon for southern wars and southern politics, and the Game of Thrones that killed my father and nearly killed my family." "What is the dragon for?" Greatjon Umber asked, because Umber asked the questions that everyone else was thinking. "The dragon is for the north. The dragon is for the wall. The dragon is for the long night, for this one, and for the next one, and for everyone that comes after. The Targaryens built a dynasty on dragonfire. I'm building a defense. You could rule the 7 kingdoms. I could. I don't want to. I want..." Jon stopped. He looked at the hall, at the faces, at Robb, who was watching with the complicated expression of a brother who loved him and envied him and was proud of him simultaneously. At Ned, who was watching with the expression of a man who had spent 17 years protecting a secret, and who was now watching the secret make a choice that Ned had not dared to hope for. "I want to be a Stark," Jon said. "Not by name. I know what my name is. By choice. By the things I do. By the way I govern and fight and live. I am the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. I have the blood of the dragon and the blood of the wolf. I choose the wolf. Not because the dragon is wrong, because the wolf is mine. The dragon is my blood. The wolf is my heart." The hall was quiet. The northern quiet. The silence that was not empty, but full. Full of the assessment of a people deciding whether the words were worth the speaking, and the speaker was worth the hearing. Ned stood. The Lord of Winterfell. The man who had lied for 17 years. The man who had kept the secret that was now standing before the north with a dragon at his back and a wolf at his side, and the choice of a lifetime in his hands. "The north accepts," Ned said. "Jon Stark. Not Targaryen, not Snow, Stark. The name that Ned had never been able to give because the giving would have exposed the secret, and the exposing would have killed the boy. The name that was now possible because the secret was exposed, and the boy was alive, and the choice had been made. Jon Stark. The hall rose. Not the dramatic standing of a coronation, the gradual, individual northern standing of lords choosing to acknowledge a man. Umber first. Mormont second. Manderley third. One by one, the northern lords rising for the dragon prince who had chosen the wolf. Robb stood last. Not because Robb disagreed, because Robb wanted his standing to mean something separate from the lords. The lords stood for the dragon rider. Robb stood for his brother. "Jon Stark," Robb said, and smiled. The Robb smile. The brother's smile. The smile that said, "I am proud of you, and I am jealous of you, and I love you, and the love is the thing that survives everything else." "Jon Stark," the hall echoed. Jon stood before the north with a dragon at his back and a wolf at his side, and the name he had earned through blood and through choice and through the refusal to become the thing the world expected. He was a Stark. He had always been a Stark. The dragon had just proven it. What if Jon Snow hatched a dragon in Winterfell? The egg came from the Tower of Joy, Rhaegar's legacy, Lyanna's keepsake, the stone that Ned carried north with a baby and a promise. The stone sat in Winterfell's crypts for 16 years, dormant, waiting for the blood that would wake it. The blood came. Jon found the egg. The egg found Jon. And the hatching, in the bastard's quarters, on the third night of the royal visit, while Robert Baratheon slept 2 floors below, cracked open every secret and every relationship and every political balance in the 7 kingdoms. Robert saw the dragon and saw the truth. The bastard was not a bastard. The bastard was Rhaegar's son. Ned had lied. For 17 years, the most honest man in the 7 kingdoms had lied to the king's face to protect his sister's child. Robert did not swing the hammer, because the child had Lyanna's face, and Lyanna's face was the one thing Robert could not destroy. The dragon grew. The world responded. Tywin calculated. Stannis assessed. Daenerys watched. Robert raged. The North closed ranks around the dragon rider, who was Stark by raising and Targaryen by blood, and who was learning, day by day, to hold both. The dragon's purpose was not the Southern War. The dragon's purpose was the Northern one, the Long Night, the White Walkers, the ancient threat that required fire in the North. Jon flew against the dead on the dragon's back and burned the army that no sword could stop. And the burning was the justification for everything the dragon had cost. The secrets exposed, the relationships shattered, the political explosion that had detonated the morning the egg cracked. Jon chose the North. The Targaryen heir with the dragon and the claim and the blood chose to be a Stark. Not by name, by heart. The dragon was his blood. The wolf was his choice, and the choosing was the thing that made him worth following. Jon Stark. The ice and the fire. The wolf and the dragon. The boy who hatched an egg and changed the world and chose, when the world offered him everything, the only thing he had ever wanted. A family. A name. A home. Winterfell.